Today's guest is Danny Bendas, managing partner at Synergy Restaurant Consultants with over 3 decades of experience helping restaurants build stronger operations, improve margins, and scale sustainability. Danny brings a rare blend of cultural expertise and executive strategy. This is a conversation for operators who care about execution, not fluff. Welcome, Danny.
Hey, how are you? God, you made me feel old there with that 3 decades comment. But yeah, so we're in our 36 years as Synergy Restaurant Consultants. It's been a great ride so far.
Danny, take us back. What first pulled you into the restaurant industry?
I have an older brother who got a job at a college near my house. He was a dishwasher slash cook's assistant, and he went on to the Culinary Institute of America, as I ended up going to. And, he left, and so I went and I basically took his job. Since then, I was 14, I think, years old. I've never had another job other than restaurants from that day forward, except once at the Culinary, I worked a summer job putting beds together in a dormitory they were building. So I started as a dishwasher when I was 14, and I've been working in the business ever since.
All right. Well, how did your early culinary and operational role shape how you consult today?
I have been very fortunate, Ed, to have worked with a lot of really great people, and going to the culinary. When I graduated from the culinary in 1975, I was home after graduation. I was working for a local restaurant, actually the place where I had my first cook's job. And I got a call from one of my instructors at the culinary. He had moved on and he was working for a company called Gilbert Robinson Restaurants in Kansas City, Missouri. For those that don't know, GR was the creator of Houlihan's Old Place. And the original one was in Kansas City, Missouri on the Country Club Plaza. And they needed a unit chef for that location. And, it was kind of funny. I was 20 years old when I flew out to interview, and I was 21 when I moved to take the job like 30 days later. And, because of that experience, and then I took over as chef of their flagship restaurant, which was literally next door to the original Houlihan's. And that to this day was my best restaurant experience. We had a great crew, great team, and I really felt like I was teaching there. And 3 of the guys that worked for me ended up going to culinary schools and moved on in their career. And then the other thing, again, in Kansas City, we worked for a Hallmark Cards restaurant subsidiary, and we recreated what became known as the Heartland Market at Crown Center in Midtown Kansas City. At that time, it was Midtown. And I was very fortunate to work with who at that time was the iconic restaurateur of New York City, whose name was Joseph Baum. And Joseph Baum created all the food service at the World Trade Center, Windows on the World, the Big Kitchen.
Yeah.
He created the Four Seasons restaurant in New York. He created a whole bunch of restaurants. And he also reimagined and reworked the Rainbow Room at Rockefeller Center. Joe was an iconic restaurateur. He was sort of Napoleonic to a degree, but it was just amazing to work with a guy of that stature and his team and all the knowledge that I was able to absorb working there. So I've been pretty fortunate to have worked with a lot of really great people and gained a lot of experience, which now has helped me, obviously, in my consulting career to help other people.
Oh, because I was going to ask you, what was your biggest lesson you learned moving from operator to advisor?
I think the biggest lesson is to listen, learn, and collaborate. I learned an awful lot from a lot of people of how to do things the right way and how to do things the wrong way. I always kind of joke with people that I'm a much better listener than I am talker, because I feel like you learn a lot more when you're listening as opposed to when you're talking. So, and I think just having the passion to help people. I was telling you just a few minutes ago, I always thought that if I could be a teacher, that would have been my calling. Unfortunately, it's hard to make a living when you're a teacher, you're an elementary or a public school teacher. Consulting has provided me with the opportunity to teach and help and give people, sound judgment on how best to do things to help set them up for success. And it really feels good in your heart when you see somebody become successful or more successful because of the things that you've done to help them.
Excellent. True words. You've seen, I'm going to use the word decades of industry cycles.
Mm-hmm.
What patterns repeat themselves?
You're going to think this is absolutely crazy, but one of my most favorite movies is The Godfather, right? And there's some pretty interesting lessons in The Godfather if you really think about it. I don't know if you know the movie relatively well, right?
Oh, I've seen it many times.
Okay, so Clemenza, one of the Coppolas, right? He's having a conversation with Michael before Michael shoots those two guys and goes off to Sicily. He says, every 10 years or so, you got to have a war to clean out the bad blood and stuff like that. So I think, not that there's wars in the restaurant industry, but restaurants tend to be very cyclical, and the business in general. When things are good, a lot of people want to get into the business, and there's a lot of perception that the restaurant business, it's pretty easy. You want to make pizza, you make some dough and sauce. People don't understand how complex the restaurant industry really can be. It's really one of the only industries that I know of where everything in terms of the entire cycle of the business happens under one roof. So, you manufacture, you market, you sell, you serve, you collect the money. It all happens in one place, as opposed to a lot of other businesses where the product is made over here, it's sold over there. There's an office here that does the marketing. It all happens under one roof. So restaurateurs have to really know a lot of different things. So it's given me that opportunity to really learn from people and collaborate and take that knowledge and kind of share it with other people, right?
Can you give us an example, something you've learned that you put into practice?
Oh boy. There's a million of them. I'm not sure where I would even begin to start. Boy, that's a tough one, Ed. There's so many of them. I'll give you a crazy one. Okay. And it's so minor, but it's sort of telling is, like we worked in a restaurant company, or one of my last corporate jobs, where this poor cook, he was trying to wash lettuce and he couldn't find the stopper to fill the sink with water, right? How crazy is that, right? So it just gets down to, having a culture where you care for your people and you provide the tools to do their job, right? Well, in this instance,
Right.
Something as simple as a drain stopper. So this guy figured out that if he took a 64 count lime and he put it into the drain, that it actually literally stopped the water so he could fill the sink in order to wash the lettuce for the shift. Okay, so now I know that is absolutely totally insane, and it would certainly not be one of the greatest lessons I've learned in the business, but it's the one more humorous one. I always seem to remember that, and that was almost like 40 years ago. And I guess the big lesson there is, if you want people to excel and you want business to excel, you have to give them the tools and the knowledge and the training in order for them to do their job. And in this case, he could have just said, okay, to hell with it. I'm not going to bother washing the lettuce. I can't fill the sink with water. But he figured out a way to do it because he cared, right? So I guess there are a lot of lessons in that one little story, as it turns out, right? So, but just teaching principles, teaching, process, and learning about process. I got another one here real quick I can share with you. It actually goes back to Joseph Baum. When he first came on board to help us at Crown Center, we had the right budgets, right? And, writing budgets is like torture for a lot of people, right? Including me. It's very arduous, very detailed, takes a lot of time. And what he made us do was basically a 3-step process. So the first thing we had to do was come up with what he called assumptions and criteria. And this was before you put a number on the piece of paper. And this was before Excel. Okay, this is a long time ago, right? And so we had to take
You're
off
aging
our
yourself.
Yeah, well, hey, you said decades, right? So you weren't wrong, right? So we had to take off our blinders and say, and the business we were working for was losing, I think, $2 million a year. It was heavily subsidized by the parent company. So the goal was we had to get profitable, obviously. So assumption and criteria basically said, if I could do anything that I wanted to do that would either improve the guest experience, increase revenue, or reduce costs, what would it be? And it could be anything, okay? And you wrote those out and we presented them to our bosses. I was in charge of all of the support services for this business, basically like a commissary, right? So we had a linen room, we had a commissary kitchen, we had centralized purchasing, we had an employee cafeteria, and all of those things, right? I put together a list of these assumptions and criteria, presented them to my boss and Mr. Baum, and they approved them. So that was step one. Step two was to write a business plan that said, okay, I plan on closing the laundry room by June 1st of next year. And the result is we're going to save on this and this and this, and then we're going to send stuff out, or we're going to have employees wash their uniforms or whatever. And that's going to happen on June 1st. And I'm projecting that we're going to save $30,000 a year. Okay. So I did that for all of my assumptions, had a meeting with my bosses to get it approved. They approved it. And then based on all of that, I then started putting pencil to paper and creating a budget. And the budget basically said, on June 1, all this overhead of the laundry room is going away. Okay. And what that did was, A, it forced me to really think about the numbers for my area of responsibility before I did a budget. And B, it gave me a roadmap for the year. And I knew what I had to work on to achieve all of the various goals by the deadlines that I agreed to at the time that I got approval for my assumptions and my business plan. And, at the end of the next year, I had hit all of those targets. And I think our department that I was responsible for, I don't know, I think we saved the company over $500,000, give or take. So I would say is for much better than the Lime story. But when you're looking at restaurants and how you budget, it's not just numbers to paper. You got to think about, what do you want to accomplish? What kind of goals can you create for yourself for the following year? And back to what I said earlier, you get collaboration from your team members and say, hey, what can we do? And take the blinders off and think about it, and then circle back to what really can be realistic, right? So that was, and I still recommend that to people today. And that happened probably in 1979 when we had to go through that exercise. So that was a huge
things
lesson.
are just, whether you're doing it on paper or you're doing it on a spreadsheet or any other way with the technology today, some ways of doing things still come into play to this day because they're good.
I worked for a guy. I worked for a guy many years ago who really believed that managers understood their numbers much better if they pushed a pencil. And again, this is before a lot of the technology that exists today. Restaurants were notorious for decades that there was no software or very few tools to help them, outside of a cash register or a cigar box. It was like a joke. Okay, we'll just throw it into a cigar box, all the money we make, right? But he really insisted, and we had these ledgers in the restaurants where the managers had to manually write their numbers, sales, costs, and everything else, because it kept them close to the numbers so they could better manage their business. Sometimes the old-fashioned way is better than all of the technology that you have today, right?
So based on what you just said, what separates restaurants that survive from those that truly scale or fail?
I think a big part of it is culture, and then culture leads to great hospitality, assuming that you have the right culture, right? A culture of caring and passion.
Can you explain that culture a little bit?
Yeah, I can give you some examples, more, I guess, better than explaining. So, and, I'm going to use some brands. I hope that's okay. But when Chick-fil-A is known for great customer service, caring for their guests, even though there's somebody talking into a microphone and a bag is coming through a hole in the wall, literally, right? They get very high scores for customer service and rating, and it's because they care about their team, they care about how they talk to people, and they care about how they handle their employees and how they handle their guests. So when I say culture, that's the caring and having employees that are energized and care about the guests. But we always use a saying, you hire for personality, but you train for skill, right? It's very hard to hire somebody or train personality. People are either friendly, passionate, energetic, and caring, or they're not. And part of the interview and the screening process is finding those that have that energy and that caring that fits into your brand and fits into your culture, right? The other big part of it beyond culture, Ed, is just the whole idea of process. And like I said, giving people the skills, the knowledge, the training, the coaching, and the mentoring to give them a chance to do their job efficiently. I always live by the principle that before, God forbid, I had to terminate someone, I always ask myself, did I give them an opportunity to succeed, right? Did I give them the tools? Did I train them properly? Did I coach them? Did I give them the opportunity to be successful? And if I answer that question, any one of those pieces as a no, shame on me, not shame on them, because I even set them up for success. And then I go back and try to, fill in those voids to give them that chance, right?
Right. Excellent. Where do you see the biggest operational pain point restaurant owners are facing right now?
Probably, well, two, I guess, really. The two biggest cost things you have to worry about in restaurants is cost of goods, what it costs you to buy the materials that you need in order to produce the product you're going to sell, and
Mhm.
the labor it takes to produce it and serve it and account for it. Labor is a challenge because, there's a shortage of labor. There's a shortage of qualified, talented people out there. The cost of labor with, minimum wage and all sorts of things and benefits just keeps going up. And you'll see as a result, there's always technology resources to help you figure out how to mitigate your cost of labor. And then there's also, the purchasing of food and beverage, alcohol, whatever. So constantly staying on top of all of those costs without sacrificing the guest experience. It's very easy to cut labor, but the bigger question is, if I'm going to cut labor, how am I going to continue to provide great service, keep the restaurant clean and stuff like that? So, and then there's sometimes a habit where people sort of, you cut labor, you lose a little revenue, so you got to cut more labor. So you basically end up slashing your way to the bottom, and you end up doing the sales that you're capable of, not the sales that you would prefer to do. So it's a game of pennies. You got to really manage every penny, because, a great restaurant, if they can run 15% net operating profit, 15 cents of every dollar, you got to work really hard for 15 cents. And if you screw something up somewhere, you're down to 8 cents. Pretty soon, you're either not making money or you're working awfully hard for not a lot of it.
Yeah. So that brings me to, where do you see automation and AI having the most immediate impact in restaurants?
I'm going to be a little rebellious on this one for the reason that I honestly believe that there is a trend, and will be a continued trend, that people want to talk to people. Okay. And I think that technology, robotics, AI, they are tools to help people provide better service or do a better job. I don't, to me, it would be kind of scary to replace people with other, robots or AI and stuff like that. Now, again, it's a perfect
That'd be
question.
weird
I'll ask
seeing
you
a
a question.
robot.
When you have a problem and you call the 800 number and you have to go through 25 buttons in order to, maybe you'll get a hold of somebody, a real person that you can talk to, is that frustrating to you?
I think everyone would say yes.
Okay. So that's the result of
I don't think I'm the only one that is saying, I just
exactly.
want to
Yeah.
talk to a
So,
person.
so I think, there's a frustration level there where, hey, look, if I can solve it without a human, great, if it's not a big deal. But if I need to speak to someone, there's a reason why. And it really irritates me when I just can't get a hold of a human. Or you go to websites, there's no phone number, everything is done through chat or email, and you just can't get what you need. It becomes super frustrating. So I think there'll be a lot of frustration, and especially in restaurants, you deal with, your phone, your computer, and all of this stuff all day. When you get to a restaurant, you really just want to have a nice social event with someone there that wants to help you and talk to you and take care of you. And I think that's what a differentiator between restaurants and a lot of other businesses, right? So
That's you weren't that much of a rebel.
yeah, well, but there's
There's a place. I always say, be responsible with
right.
technology.
Yeah, when I say rebellion, I mean, it's like everybody thinks that robots are going to take over the world and AI can solve every problem. But those things, I think, can help a human do a better job and maybe take away tasks
Absolutely.
that are hard, and will allow a restaurant to redeploy that labor into providing guest service or doing something else. Like Chipotle, as an example, they were testing, I believe they're rolling it out, a machine that peels avocados because it's very arduous, for an employee to do that. Okay, that's great. So does that hopefully that allows the employee to do something that's more guest forward than, the arduous task of peeling avocados to make guacamole, which I'm sure they use quite a bit of. Right? Just one minor example of being an aid versus a replacement for people, right? But it also helps you with your labor costs, which is a critical factor in your P&L.
Yes. As you were saying, the margins are very small in the restaurant industry.
Yeah, and we just did a podcast yesterday. We have a podcast called The Restaurant Roadmap. We just did an hour podcast with one of our primary financial guru on our team about creating a P&L via your chart of accounts, how you manage it, how you look at it, how you assess it, to give you pertinent information to help you run your business as effectively as possible in ways that put up flags to say, hey, our produce cost just went up by 2 points last month. We got to figure this out because we can't afford 2 points in costs, right? So it's just to help people understand how to effectively create a P&L, but then also how to effectively look at it as a tool to help, get them set up for success. So,
and where can they find you?
It's called The Restaurant Roadmap on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, most of the podcast networks. You'll find us. So, yeah, we have a lot of good podcasts out there on leadership and catering and operations. This one happens to be financial. So,
yeah.
If anybody wants to check it out, go to The Restaurant Roadmap and hopefully you'll find us. Yeah.
Excellent. Where do you see operators make when expanding too quickly? What mistakes?
The easiest way to say that would be the Peter principle, not having a strong bench to open restaurants. Unfortunately, very true with chain restaurants, especially when they go public, you have that pressure to grow and beat last quarter's estimates and stuff like that. And if you don't have a solid bench of management and support, you end up making bad decisions with putting people that either aren't ready or aren't qualified in the positions. And you basically set them up for failure, and then you set yourself up for failure. I think the other big part of that also is you have this urgency to grow. So you may end up picking bad locations, and you say, well, yeah, this is a B or a C location, but I have a great brand that can make it work. And then the answer to that is no, you can't. Right. So you end up with a bunch of bad locations that you now end up with financial problems, whether there just isn't enough traffic or the rent doesn't work, any number of reasons. So making quick decisions in terms of, your labor and your locations, I think can be disastrous in today's world. Not a lot of margin for error. Just like with guest service, if somebody has a bad experience, you have so many choices of where you want to go. You have a bad experience, there's no reason to go back. You lose the customer. That multiplies for you rapidly.
And that's where you said before, knowing your numbers and your budget,
right,
to stay on track.
Yep.
So you're able to make those quicker decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, but let me also say this as a caveat to that. We find oftentimes when we do consulting with our clients that the people, in the restaurants or just the organization in general, you become so caught up in whether it's checklists or it's spreadsheets or it's numbers or it's whatever it is, that you lose sight of the reason why you're in business. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but it's a lot more true than I think people would realize. Here's another lesson learned from one of your previous questions. I attended a seminar when I was, I think 18 years old. And there was a gentleman named Walter Conti who owned the restaurant called Conti's Cross Keys Inn in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, which is close to where I grew up. And one of the things he said, which, to this day, and I was like 18, he said, if you take care of your guests, you never have to worry about how much money is in your cash register, right? Now, that's a pretty simple statement, but I think that is one of the most profound things that I've ever heard in my entire, 60-some years in the restaurant industry. And, when you lose sight of why you're in business, which is to take care of the guests and provide great service, great hospitality at a fair price and a great value, generally your numbers work. My first restaurant business job when I was 16 was a family-run German restaurant in Pennsylvania, where I grew up. And they didn't do inventory. I don't think they had any systems. They had nothing, but they really took care of their guests, and they were business savvy. And, they ran their restaurant for, I think, 30 some years, right? Because they cared about their guests and they cared about their people. It always gets back to that, no matter what you try to do, right?
Right. Because you could quickly go from 100% to 50%.
Yep.
Once the word spreads,
Yep.
there's not good customer service, and they're not having, and that doesn't even count the food.
Right. Well, there's this other saying that we use quite often, it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? So you start saying, well, I could save a nickel an ounce or a pound on cheese. The guests don't really know, we think it's just as good. So you start just making these little cuts here and there. And over time, it just begins to catch up with you. And then you start wondering why people don't come and see you anymore, because you're not serving and providing the same thing you did when you were successful, right?
Oh, that is so true.
Beware, beware.
I could add to that. I had the exact same experience of what you just said. I used to get this soup it was a diner. They've been around forever, and they only served it on one day a week. So sometimes I would go just to get the soup because I knew it was there. Lunchtime. I went one day and I immediately knew it was different. And I asked them, I said, what happened? Because it wasn't as good. And they had changed ingredients, just like you said. It's funny. I'm sure I'm not the only one, because you can notice it. The same type of soup, a little different. It went from here to now it's just average or even below average.
Yeah. So I'm guessing you don't go back. And not only did they lose the soup sale, but they lost the rest of your selections for that whenever you went, right? So yeah.
Correct. But that was a great example. So Danny, where are you and Synergy headed as far as your consulting and your business in the next 6 to 12 months in terms of growth or focus?
I think, well, again, we're doing our podcast because we want people to learn more about who we are, what we do, and understand our expertise. But really, I think continuing, my partner Dean and I have been together, I think we're in 36 years as Synergy. We aren't the young bucks we used to be, right? So we have a great team of people that we just sort of slowly begin to transition more of the business responsibility to them. We're still very actively engaged, but we've been fortunate to surround ourselves with a great group of people. And, if you want to see who those are, if you go to our website, which is synergyconsultants.com. And, between everybody on the team, I don't know, you have probably 400 or 500 years of restaurant experience. And we like to bring in new blood. And really, the bottom line is we love what we do. We love helping people. I view what we do as a way to give back to the industry, to help the industry grow, get better, keep developing talent. So I don't see us changing much in that regard, other than, again, just getting our team, more engaged in running the business. And, Dean and I taking our years of experience and helping them. And, they're smart people. We're learning from them as well. So we just want to keep getting better and keep providing services to our clients and have fun doing it. If you don't have any fun, what's the point, right?
Life is short.
Exactly.
Danny, anything else you want to advertise or promote?
No, I just think, I think we're different from a lot of other consultancies, because I think, we perceive ourselves to be more of a cottage consultancy. We're very hands-on. We love helping people. We have a tremendous amount of people we want to help people either get more successful, create a successful brand. And, I think I said earlier, oftentimes, we do what we do because we need money to make a living. And you get, at least me, and I think everybody on our team would agree, you get a tremendous amount of personal, heartfelt satisfaction when you see our clients get better. I'll give you 2 quick examples before we part ways here today. We have a client, or had a client in Guatemala, and they had a restaurant brand that they wanted to expand to get to, I forget, let's just say 500 restaurants. And, obviously it's a third world country. A lot of their restaurants were in very poor neighborhoods. And we went in and we helped them rework their kitchen, improve their efficiency so that it could open more restaurants more quickly. So in my perspective, having the ability to do that, to help people in that country better their lives by getting a job, learning and progressing, in income, but also in their personal growth, hugely rewarding. And then the other example, we have a bakery client in Bogota, Colombia, and we've established a really good relationship. We've done, 8 projects with these people over 10 years. And every time we leave, everybody hugs. We've helped them a lot improve their business, enhance their sales, enhance the quality of life for their employees. And again, you just have a really good feeling that you helped somebody become successful. Not only the client, but the people that are working there. By, in that particular case, we rework their kitchen to make it easier for their team to execute their menu. It makes their job easier, right? So,
Absolutely.
it's just good, heartfelt passion to want to help people, which I think is what drives, Synergy Restaurant Consultants when it's all said and done.
And those are the type of businesses you want to be involved with. Somebody that's going to go the extra mile because they want you to succeed.
Right.
And as a result, they're going to succeed.
Yeah, sure.
It's like a chain reaction. And I wish more businesses would do that type of relation instead of just trying to go for the money.
Yeah, it's sort of frustrating.
Money will come.
Yeah, and it's frustrating for us where we give people really great recommendations, and they hire us and they pay us for that service, and we're agnostic. What I like to say, diplomatically honest. We don't get hired to tell people how great they are. We're hired to help people get better, right? And sometimes it's like we always say. Sometimes it's hard to criticize somebody's baby, right? So, but that's what we get paid for. We do it in a very diplomatic, very helpful manner. If they don't take the information and use it, it's like, why were we engaged and why did you pay us if you're not going to take action to improve yourself? Most of the time people take our recommendations and they get better, but there's just sometimes where you just kind of go, why? It's kind of crazy because again, our goal is to help people. Not anybody can come in and criticize anybody. You can come into Synergy and you could probably find 10,000 things that we could do better, which is great. But tell me how to get better. Don't just tell me what's wrong. Right. Everybody understands the problems. What we like to do is give people the solutions.
And that's what makes it. You come in, you help them get those solutions.
Exactly.
So they can improve for the future.
Yeah.
So you're all across absolutely the U.S., but you also venture out to other countries.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we have a couple of people on our team, Dean included. They're in the United Kingdom doing some work for an international client as we speak.
Excellent. So, that's awesome. I love what you do. You got a great business. Danny, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for sharing your experience and insights with us. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this episode with anyone passionate about innovation, leadership, or the future of intelligent automation. I'm Ed Moran, and as always, stay visionary.